Hi, Tim.
Hi, Chloe. Hi, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. I'm really lucky to have Chloe Duckworth with me today, and we're going to be talking about extending digital accessibility, which I think is just an amazing thing. We're going to talk about some of the work that Chloe's doing and her company's doing, and some of the way that we can all help and support accessibility, and how we can be, all of us, be more inclusive. And I think that being inclusive as society is a great thing. Chloe, before we get any further, tell people where they can get hold of you.
Awesome. So you can find me on most major social platforms: LinkedIn, Twitter, company Instagram, as well as a pretty popular TikTok. So we're Valence Vibrations for all company handles, and Chloe Duckworth on LinkedIn and Twitter. My email is also chloe@valencvibrations.com if you have any questions.
So I've kind of broken the rules today, Chloe.
Okay.
Because I don't normally allow people to come on and talk about their company.
Well, thank you.
but I can't remember how we found each other, but I thought I need to get Chloe on to come on and talk about what she's doing. So why don't you, before we get, why don't you explain what your company, your CEO for, what it does?
Sure. So I founded Valence Vibrations. We are an accessibility company. We're creating essentially real-time emotional subtitles to improve digital accessibility online. What does this mean? I'm sure most of you have seen closed captioning on pretty much every major platform that you're interacting online. We see it on Zoom and Teams. We see it on social media in the form of alt text and automatic closed captioning on videos. Essentially, we're trying to add emotional context to those environments to help people better connect with each other across demographics and read the room, as well as check in with your own emotions. The challenge that we're trying to solve is that emotions are highly context and demographic specific. And so the most underrepresented person in a given conversation or in a room is most likely to be misunderstood, because the way that we are trained neurologically to interpret emotions is by comparing it to that of people within our own in-group. So when I'm speaking with someone that has a very different accent, neurotype, gender than myself, it's more difficult to perceive their emotions because we have different tonal patterns and the way that we're conveying our emotions to people. And so we're trying to address that, which is called the double empathy problem.
Yes. So we have someone on our team who is she's not deaf, but so she has to have, we have to all have the subtitles on the but this is just taking it further, isn't it, in terms of recognizing that people that neurodivergence means that there are other things that we need to take into account.
Essentially, yes. And I think even for people that are deaf or hard of hearing, seeing just subtitles on what's being said in a conversation is providing you a pretty small amount of information about the tonal inflections of the person that's speaking. So sarcasm will be missed. A lot of other cues are obfuscated from just seeing the words that someone is saying. So I think really the idea is that emotional subtitles can help all kinds of people that are already using subtitles but not seeing additional context behind them, and also people that are just wanting to better connect in virtual environments. I think with the rate of acceleration of technology, there's a lot of opportunity for us to develop more humanizing ways to interact with this technology. And I think that we're at really a critical point in the development of this technology where we could go either way. And I'm really excited to be a part of the humanizing technology camp that gets to celebrate the wins of LLMs, but also recognize that there's a lot of work that we need to do to make sure that we're interacting with this technology and other humans online in more humanizing and ethical ways.
So can you give us an example of some of the things, because you're doing stuff with an Apple Watch, aren't you?
Yes. Sure. So
Explain.
so we just launched Vibes for Apple Watch back in December, and that's essentially like a real-time emotional subtitle that's using visual and haptic feedback. Haptics is essentially the vibrational motors on a given wearable device, and so we're essentially conveying emotions as vibrations. So you can feel the vibes, the app is called Vibes, as a vibration on your wrist. And each of these vibrations were designed to emulate the emotion that's being expressed in the moment. So the angry vibration, for example, is this sort of abrupt jolt, whereas happy is this light, fluttery vibration that feels like the butterflies in your stomach when you're happy. And so that was our initial application on Apple Watch. We're also licensing APIs and have some video conferencing applications coming soon, so stay tuned there. Our goal really is to integrate emotional subtitles into all of the major communication platforms online. So moving from there.
Because you put out a questionnaire, didn't you,
I did.
on LinkedIn recently, asking people about which way you saw it go, which way they wanted you to take the product.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I put this poll out yesterday, and as of now, video conferencing is winning. But I was surprised in sort of the split results between smartphone application that was not wearable and video streaming. So a lot of people were interested in integrating this into pre-recorded entertainment platforms like Netflix or Hulu or even YouTube. And so it was interesting to sort of see that result, as I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, I'm a member of a particular Facebook group where we bore each other with talking about vinyl records, and I hadn't realised that there was a couple of member of people that are blind.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, and so one of the things that we're doing is that we're being far more descriptive about what we're saying, because the blind person, they can't actually see, because not what we do is we put a picture, you take a photo of the album, you put it up, and most people were just doing that, and it's like no, what you got to do, you've got to put the description, because of the people that they're actually using a
screen reader.
Yeah, screen reader to basically, and it's like, and we need to take this into account, don't we?
Yeah. I'm excited. I think in the next year or so, we're going to see a lot better CV on the internet, where they can just automate the alt text for folks that are using screen readers in ways that are better than current. So a lot of times on social media, people have to manually write alt text, and there's not really a standard practice that's followed across social platforms of the way that you should describe people. So sometimes someone will post a selfie of themselves and put alt text and just say, photo of smiling person. Nothing about the background, nothing about their race, gender, or anything about their expression. So that's not really helpful to anyone. And so I think standardizing that for manual alt text, but also improving the automation of that's going to be really important. And we saw that with closed captioning. And so that's something that's definitely coming.
You mentioned something earlier on, and I know during the prep call we had, you talked about double empathy, and it was like, well, that's a new one on me. So you kindly sent me a link, and I was able to read up with it. So explain to me what the audience want double empathy, because if I don't know, there must be other people out there that don't know about that as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Double empathy is the theory by Dr. Milton, and it was originally created in the context of autism, neurodiversity, and sort of this idea of cross neurotype communication, or speaking with someone that has a different neurotype than you. To clarify that term, because I realize that also might not be known to all of the viewers, neurotype is essentially the type of brain that you have. So many people are neurotypical if they've never been diagnosed or self-identify with a neurodivergent neurotype. Classic examples of neurodivergent neurotypes are autism and ADHD, but also things like anxiety disorders, depression, epilepsy, PTSD. Stroke victims after having a stroke have fundamentally different neural pathways. And so essentially it is recognizing the fact that brains process the same information different ways, and different brains are also optimized for particular unique capabilities and also have some particular challenges in integrating to certain environments. So classic example within autism, a lot of folks that particularly struggle with certain sensory modalities, like hearing, for example, might be hypersensitive to loud sounds and overlapping voices. And so a crowded bar or nightclub might be very distressing and overwhelming for someone within that particular niche of autism. And so double empathy is essentially saying that every person has a unique way of communicating emotion. There are generalizable trends across given intersections of identity within neurotypes in this case. And when you're speaking with someone of a different neurotype, because they have different cues and signals to convey their emotions, there's a disconnect in your ability to recognize the emotions of the person that you're speaking with outside of your neurotype. And so we've sort of extended this to say that really each race, culture, identity, each accent, each gender, really every intersection of identity has specific tonal cues in the way that they're expressing their emotions. And so it's not just within neurodiversity, but rather culturally and societally, it's very difficult for us to perceive the emotions of people that aren't like us. And so we wanted to create a tool to essentially bridge this gap so that people can better understand each other without having to change their inherent vocal expressions. And this is actually a pretty big problem in society today. Within autism, we call this masking, where people will essentially convey non-standard or non-natural expressions to try to mask a more neurotypical form of expression. And it's very draining for autistic people to have to do this, and it also makes them less likely to share their unique viewpoints with the world if they have to constantly sort of parse everything through the lens of how do I sound more neurotypical. Similarly, within different accent groups or immigrants coming to a new country, oftentimes within America, they're recommended to take what are called accent reduction classes, which are literally training them to sound less like the particular accent and linguistic group that they came from, which is very sad. Because I think, I mean, the promise of multiculturalism is that we need to honor each culture and each accent. And so really there are a lot of intersections that are being discriminated against and underrepresented in conversations and having to sort of accommodate other communication standards. And so this is saying at large, why don't we find a way to honor each person's unique voice? Within the autistic community in particular, the context for sort of how double empathy theory arose was that there is this theory within autism that autistic people lacked empathy and were unable to empathize with anyone outside of themselves. And that's since been debunked many times, in large part due to double empathy. But the challenge wasn't that people were unable to empathize, it was that they were unable to perceive the emotions of the person that they're speaking with.
Yeah.
And that perception gap across all people occurs, not just within autism, but it's a classic example of stigmatizing other and telling that group that there's something inherently wrong with their perception.
I remember when you mentioned it to me, and I went and read it, and I had to go and read it again, and it's like, yeah, this is just like it is just like life, because there can be all kinds of situations where you talk to somebody, you think they didn't really understand what I said,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily what you said or whatever, but yeah, absolutely. The fact that you're working with this is, I think, is just it's you know it's it, this is changing lives.
Yeah. Thank you.
And changing lives for the better. For people that don't know, there's a hashtag out there called Tech for Good, and this is a classic example of how we can use technology to make the world more inclusive and make the world a better place.
Yeah, totally. I think there's a lot of promise in the moment that we're in right now. We now have access to very, very powerful AI tools at our disposal, and there's a lot of promise in being able to democratize access to those tools in ways that can improve the quality of life for all sorts of people across the globe. And I'm very excited about that. And I think that a lot of the conversations right now around AI safety versus AI ethics are important, but we need to understand that being able to democratize tools is going to be the fastest way to improve AI ethics. So it's not the same types of people that are creating AI solutions, and oftentimes replicating their biases into the AI models that they're creating, but having this ability for many different types of people to train their own models optimized for their own use cases is really exciting right now. And so excited to see sort of the next 6 months of innovation that come from having all of these tools open sourced.
So being a CEO of a company that's changing the world must be exciting. Let me change gear a bit,
Yeah.
and ask you some of the more harder questions. So what about um, um, what about cybersecurity? What about data? What are you doing about those things?
Yeah. So great question. I think this was a primary concern for us starting the company because historically within affective computing, there have been malevolent uses of the technology that have come from having poor cyber security standards, poor privacy standards, but also like poor sort of terms of use. So for example, there are some employee surveillance technologies that exist online, scraping all of your emails and Slack messages and essentially making performance improvement plan and ultimately firing decisions based off of some of the analytics of how you're communicating and even private conversations with coworkers. So that's very troubling to me. On the data security side, obviously, the Cambridge Analyticas of the world have used this data in very unethical ways, in sort of scraping social media sites as well. And so we wanted to make sure that we were, number one, taking in the minimum necessary information in the most secure way in order to ensure that that information didn't have a very high likelihood of being misused. The way that we've thought through this on an Apple Watch, for example, is that all of the processing is on edge. So the audio processing and temporary recording is happening on your device. And essentially the model within a couple of seconds will classify the emotion in that given 3 seconds of audio, automatically delete and rewrite the audio and keep going in the conversation. And then the classification and voice can only be accessed on your device in that moment. And so you can't see it after the conversation, at least with the current iteration. But most importantly, third parties, including our company, can never see that voice or emotion information. This brings up a good question in terms of more cloud servers or processes of running this application. And within cloud settings, our goal is to take in de-identified data as much as is possible within the application, as well as only providing that application real time to people that are actually in the conversation and trying to improve their conversation on Zoom, for example. So not creating large data sets of all of the employee information of emotional states throughout the day for everyone that's interacting on Zoom, which has a much higher likelihood of being weaponized against employees. Another thing that we're doing is allowing people to opt into additional features where their voice might be having sort of a higher standard of being sent to us unencrypted or non-de-identified. And reasons why someone might consent to doing something like that is to create a essentially voice profile for themselves to improve the model for their voice and for sometimes their environment. So if you're speaking in a very particular context and you want your model to be optimized for that, you can consent to different privacy standards essentially. But enabling users to be choosers is really the overarching goal here. So taking in minimum necessary information for people to actually be able to use the technology in a useful way, and then allowing them to opt into additional features that might have different security standards is what's important, but making sure that we are keeping everything safe and not in the hands of bad actors.
I think you clearly have the balance right in terms of sharing what's required, but also allowing people, if there's certain things that they need to get access to, they may need to share a little bit more. And Andrew, who's a regular watcher of ours, said, as someone who's lost 40% of my hearing, this is groundbreaking.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I mean, that's great to hear. I think definitely for folks that are hard of hearing or have lost a significant percentage of their hearing, it's disappointing that a lot of the tools today don't provide this additional context when you're using alt text or closed captioning, because you're missing so much of the conversation that you once knew that you had, and as you progressively lost hearing, it's, I'm sure, frustrating to not have access to that information anymore and not see that replicated in the accessibility tools that you're relying on. And so I think as an overarching principle, designing accessibility tools that can create new modalities to receive exactly the same information is what's most important. So making sure that whatever the replacement is providing as rich of information, but in a different modality is really the standard that we're trying to uphold.
Chloe, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today. I'm hoping that my audience have forgiven me for allowing you to come on and pitch your product. I don't want a long queue of people trying to come up, but you have, I don't know about, you've educated, the whole point of this podcast is to educate and for us to all learn stuff. And I'm hoping that Andrew's going to put a comment that he's learned something. It takes usually about 20, 30 seconds to come through, but this is the whole point of this podcast is for us to educate the audience, to learn new things. I've certainly learned new things, and I do anyway when I interview people, but particularly, and I think they're all things that you're making the world a better place, and understanding these things makes the world a better place as well.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and what you're doing as well.
Thank you so much, Tim. I really appreciate it. I think
You're welcome.
Created such an incredible community here. So
thank you. So remind people where they can get hold of you.
Okay, so I'm on most social platforms: LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. So Valence Vibrations is our company profile, and then Chloe Duckworth is on all of the personal profiles.
And thank you, Andrew, for saying it's very educational and nothing wrong with breaking the rules sometimes. Yes,
we need some good breakers.
So thank you, Chloe, and thank you so much for your insight today. It's been exceptional.
Thanks so much, Tim.
You're welcome.